strongly about stuff and they want to put themselves forward. But that particular one is just pure political manipulation.
No, and he'd said, so his big policies, which he'd said first candidates on the women to Council of the Aging, and then he got someone to read him a statement this morning at the Scotch College, which was that he was a politician, didn't know much about politics, but that he did intend to have a sausage sizzle once a month so that he could stay in touch with voters.
That's almost like what the other guy. Yeah. So I know nothing, but I'm happy to listen to you.
Yeah,
And
and
then
I'm
what?
learning,
And then what?
and I'm learning. That's pretty much what it is.
They seem to be kind of. Oh, maybe there's actually a critique how to go about dealing with. Since you know nothing, this is what you say.
This is what you
I know
say
nothing,
to
but
try
I'm
and
willing.
discuss
But I'm willing to listen, and I'm happy to. And then I'm happy to do what you ask me to do.
That's right.
Which
I will
always
be
makes
your
me laugh
representative.
because we always laugh. What happens when you have 10 people with
you
5
have-
different opinions? Which
that's
one do
right,
you
yes,
follow?
it's like it.
Oh well. Almost there. Almost
I
over.
know, it's like I can't believe it. This is our last candidate.
This would have taken over your life completely.
Yeah, no, it
for the
has,
last
absolutely.
few
Yeah.
months.
Well, it would have been longer. Hello.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Who's in charge?
Of
Us.
You in charge?
No,
what?
of the whole event.
Yeah, of the event.
On the whole event, no, I just moderate it.
So I think it's Jane
and Michael.
I've got to introduce you to Jane.
I just want to know if it's okay to film and take photos and all the rest of the other stuff that normally happens.
Could imagine so, but yeah, definitely check it.
She's out there.
Yeah.
She's out there. She's out there front. She's got a badge on it.
Well, if they're like streaming the thing, and I don't see.
I think that's
I don't know. Maybe they're not, but they have the technology to do those kinds of things. So the last time that maybe the other one was live streamed. The parents of climate change. Yeah.
Oh,
And I actually think it's available online. I think I saw it in the past with an email that was sent around. So yeah.
there you go.
So I mean, for them, like why wouldn't they allow photos in person?
So we had this event this morning. It was chaired by one of the students,
Oh, yeah.
and she was fierce. Like there was no cowbell coming.
Yeah.
30 seconds after, she was like, "I'm sorry, we're stopping right there."
It's a bit brutal.
She was
brutal.
It was.
Yeah. That's lack of experience.
Hey, girls. There I am. Yeah, great. So we haven't pulled our names out of hat. That's what you
Yeah, I've
do
got
on
him
this
there.
occasion.
I'll wait for 2 or 3 to be around rather than I don't want anyone to think that somehow
No,
I can't do a deal
No.
and you end up with the first and the last spot.
I'm happy to go in.
Yeah. Oh, I think most people don't take it. Some people do. The first question I asked, the first meeting of this election, the first question was who's going to decide the order of the opening and closing statements.
Oh.
And said, it's the last one, right? Like the one is like almost like because if you speak first or if you speak last, or so you never know. You believe like some people are very really very careful with every single one. It's like the thing is, to be honest with you, if you think that makes a difference, there's something fundamentally, problematic about the whole exercise, really. But anyway.
Benito, what's your preference? Start dead on 7 or wait 4 minutes for stragglers? Good evening and welcome to Blackwood Uniting Church. My name is Michael Dowling, and on behalf of Blackwood Uniting Church and Blackwood Business Network, I welcome you to this Meet the Boothby Candidates event. As we gather here tonight, we acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and we acknowledge their ongoing and deep spiritual relationship to this vast and ancient land. A couple of housekeeping matters first. If you do need to visit the toilets during the evening, down the corridor toward the back of the building. If there is an emergency during the event, exits are to the front, both along the corridor, just simply out or at the back. If you have not already done so, can you please turn any electronic device, mobile phone, either to off or silent. And with that, I'll hand over to the President of Blackwood Business Network, Jane Silber-Ison.
Thank you, Michael. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending on this little bit of a chilly evening. I'd like to thank Professor Benito Cao from the Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of Adelaide for moderating this event. Thank you, Benito. Thank you to all our candidates standing for Boothby in the federal election for attending this important event. It will greatly assist our community in being informed about your policies and interests and preferences and informing their votes. Thank you also to everyone in our community who's come along to attend tonight, and thank you to the Uniting Church for providing the venue and all the equipment. We have a couple of apologies tonight. Peter Harris from the Australian Federation Party, I believe had a heart attack, which is very, very sad. Mark Aldridge, who's the State Director of the Australian Federation Party, will be attending in his stead. So thank you and welcome, Mark. Also, Graham Clark from the United Australian Party is also an apology, so we wish them both a speedy recovery. Just some reminders for tonight. The candidates have left campaign literature on the table in the foyer that you're free to take. Graham Clark has actually left a copy of his opening statement on the table in the foyer if you're interested in having a look at that, and if you'd like to contact him with any questions. I'll read out his statement later when the candidates are reading their opening statements. At the end of the evening, you'll have the opportunity to meet and speak with the candidates. The candidates will be required to observe the time limits for responses to questions, and we ask that you respectfully refrain from excessive exuberance for or against any of the particular candidates.
Thank you for the warning.
This evening, thank you. And the order of introductory statements and closing statements will be decided by lot by the moderator. Now, there are some photographers present. There's one from the National Australian Library and also some from the candidate teams. So if you're not comfortable with the possibility of you being photographed, please let me know and we'll make sure that you're out of range, or we'll make some arrangements for that. There's tea and coffee, as you may be aware, at the end of the hall here. So if you can go and get one right now if you'd like to, or wait till the end of the session. It'll be a couple of hours, so please get a tea or coffee right now if you wish. I will now... the other thing was just to let you know that this forum is being live streamed, and a link to that will be accessible on the church website after this evening. So I'll now pass you over to Associate Professor Benito Cao to run the forum. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Benito.
That's okay. Just one of these. Thanks. Good afternoon and welcome again to the Meet the Boothby Candidates Forum. My name is Benito Cao. I will be the moderator of the forum. Before we hear from the candidates, just let me explain the structure and the basic rules of the forum. These rules are important for all of us to make the most of this event and to be as fair as possible to all the candidates. The most important rule to remember is that this is not a debate. This is a forum in which the candidates have the opportunity to present their policies. So I ask everyone, candidates included, to listen to the statements without interruptions. This is not the moment to show support or rejection of any of the candidates, but that moment, of course, is at the ballot box. Once I finish with this introduction, each candidate will have 2 minutes to make an opening statement. There will be a gentle warning bell with 10 seconds to go to give the candidates time to wrap up their opening statement. The bell will ring vigorously if they are still going after the 2 minutes have concluded, and I do have the nuclear option of the cowbell if I need it. It always makes an appearance. I think it's because they like it. The order of introductions has been decided by a draw that took place a few minutes ago. The candidates have been asked to share with you in that opening statement why are they standing as a candidate, and if elected, what do they hope to achieve. Following those opening statements, I will ask a series of questions from and sent to the event organizers. Given the number of candidates and to get through as many questions as possible, candidates will have 1 minute to answer each question they wish to answer. They don't have to answer all of them if they don't want to. Again, with a 10 seconds warning bell. Following the set questions, there will be some time to ask questions from the floor, and all candidates will have the opportunity to answer all the questions, except if a question is very specific about a particular candidate. And for those of you who are thinking of asking questions later on, please formulate direct questions. And if the question requires a preamble, just make that as short as possible. When we run out of time for the Q&A, the candidates will have 1 minute each to make a closing statement, and the closing statements will bring the forum to an end, but you are welcome, as it was said earlier, to talk individually to candidates at the conclusion of the forum. So it is now time to hear the opening statements from the candidates. I'll remind you of the order: Jeremy, Paul, Mark, Rachel, Joe, and Louise. So, first up, Jeremy Carter for the Greens.
Okay. Well, thank you to all of the organisers and to all of you for coming along tonight. My name's Jeremy Carter. I'm the Greens candidate. I'm an engineering director and a project manager, and I'm also a long-term resident of Boothby, and I acknowledge that tonight we're gathered on the land of the Kaurna people. I grew up in the Adelaide Hills, and I worked for 7 years at Foodland while I was at school and uni. I studied commerce and engineering, and I graduated with first-class honours, and I've spent the last 21 years leading major projects around Australia and around the country. So here in Adelaide, I'm leading the engineering for the Festival Square precinct and also for the Aboriginal Art and Cultures Centre in the city. I've also worked on many school, university and health projects here in SA. I led the engineering for the Rod Laver Arena redevelopment in Melbourne, and I've been heavily involved in the Sydney Metro, which is an expansion of Sydney's train system. I've successfully managed businesses, and I have a good understanding of finance. I believe we need more people in Parliament who have real-world expertise, especially as we transition to a low-carbon economy. As we work towards acting on climate change, engineering has a huge role to play in renewable energy, electrified transport, and better urban planning. These are all things I have strong experience in. I'm passionate about reducing urban sprawl and making sure we get the right development in the right places. We need to stop cutting down trees, and we need sensible solutions which actually improve people's lives. I'll be a strong voice in Parliament for real action on climate change and a more caring society which really looks after people. I'll also fight for an end to the corruption in Canberra which is wrecking our democracy. So thank you for considering the Greens for your number one vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Paul Bazatil, standing as an independent.
Hello, welcome all, and thank you for the opportunity of speaking to you all today, and thank you for organising this event. My name's Paul Bazatil, and I'm a true independent for Boothby in this federal election. My career first started in the finance industry. I gradually built a business in financial planning. Towards the end of my career of 32 years, I realised that a lot of the corporations that I was dealing with, particularly life companies and investment companies, were in fact, to put it lightly, ripping my clients off with fees. And the straw that broke the camel's back was when I was approached by 3 life companies to twist my business from one organisation over to them, and they offered me somewhere in the tune of $10 million interest free. Immediately I knew where that money was coming from. I agonised over that and eventually got to sleep that night. And the next morning I woke up at 2 o'clock, sat upright, turned around to Lynn and said, I just can't do this anymore. I'm not going to go back to my clients knowing what I know and knowing what these corporations are doing to the public. So within 3 weeks I sold the business and became unemployed. Fortunately, my wife and I were working on a personal development program. We were being trained in group therapy, and that was the beginning of a 32-year career in psychotherapy.
Thank you. Next up, Mark Aldrich on behalf of Peter Harris for the Australian Federation Party.
Well, I'll let you know that Peter did have a heart attack, and luckily for the party, he's our leader. So he's the person, the candidate here for you in Boothby, and an amazing man, I must tell you, and I wish he was here to talk to you personally. He did survive, and luckily our lead candidate, we're running candidates across country, so we've got 60 lower house candidates and 20 Senate candidates. So we're not a tiny party, we're a new emerging party. He's our lead candidate in Victoria's a cardiologist, which was kind of handy. They were having dinner together when it happened. And he was about to head back here to be here for these types of forums, and his wife's decided that they'd have another child at home. And so he's just had a child 2 days ago. And so we sort of said to him, look, just take the time off for a couple more days. And so I'd like to tell you a bit about Peter, but I don't know his full history. I was brought into the party because I've spent some 20 years looking and seeking change and democratic reform, a variety of things that are important to me. And Peter put together a team across this country. He travelled across with his wife and kids in a caravan from Western Australia right around the country, trying to get the very best people together to start something different. And what he wanted to see was a different democratic form of political party, something that was puts the people first, something that ensured that the candidates could listen to you and represent you, not the party itself. We brought in the best experts in environment. We brought in the best experts in monetary. We brought in people from anywhere from animal welfare right through to healthcare, which is obviously very important. And so he put this team together in Australia. Now we ran a bit late. We had a few issues with the AEC. We had a few issues with keeping our party registered. So we managed to register 61 lower house candidates and 20 Senate candidates. We had 160, so we did have enough to fill every seat in the country. And Peter, as our leader, is an amazing man, a man of faith, and I have to cut short there. So that's what I speak about Peter. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Rachel Swift for the Liberal Party. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? I don't think you're on. Am I on? It's working? Is this one? Maybe that one. Try this one. Can you hear me? Yep. Yeah, that's the one. I can hear me. I'll take it out so it's at my mouth. All right. Hi, I'm Dr. Rachel Swift. I'm the Liberal candidate for Boothby, and thank you all for being here on this cold, wet evening, and Blackwood Uniting Church for organising tonight. I too would like to recognise that we meet on the lands of the Kaurna people and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'm standing as a candidate because I believe we need more scientists, more people who've run health systems looking after millions of people, more people who've done research in environmental science, and more people who've got international experience and international diplomatic skills. That's why I've put myself forward as a candidate. I grew up here in Boothby. My father was a scientist at the Wake campus. After doing my undergraduate degrees in environmental studies and science, I went to Oxford. I was a researcher at CSIRO, and then I went to Oxford, did my doctorate in clinical medicine, where I looked at left-right patterning in the early embryo. After that, I spent a decade with a company called the Boston Consulting Group, working in their healthcare practice here in Australia, but overseas. Along the way, I took career breaks and went and worked for the Clinton Foundation, living in Rwanda and Ethiopia, working on maternal and childhood nutrition, because without good nutrition at childhood, you can never reach your full economic, social potential, and I know that that's critically important for underserved communities. I've spent my entire life giving back to my community, whether that's volunteering over in Africa, staring down an Ebola epidemic in West Africa, or whether that's volunteering in my local community here in Adelaide, being in the CFS, I've been in the SES, been on the board of my school, I've been on the board of the General Practitioners Registered Training Organisation here in SA and WA. I love to give back, I love to serve the community, and I want to see people in Canberra who have real life experience and the ability to deliver outcomes in some of the most difficult political environments on the planet.
Next up is Jo Dyer, standing as an independent.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming out this evening, which is in fact our last candidates forum before the elections, so it feels a little bit special. And I acknowledge that it's being held on the land of the Kaurna people, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present and thank them for their custodianship of country. I'm running because I think that the looming election is the most consequential that we've had in decades. I think that because we, not just as a country, but globally as well, are confronting the biggest challenge of our existence. And we're currently doing so with, sadly, the worst government in living memory. So caught up with the game of politics and with their urgent need to win, this government pretends that there are no consequences for their desperate inaction of the last decade, our long lost decade on climate, nor the current bellicose rhetoric on display in lieu of building relationships in the region. But there is always a price to pay, and this government is mortgaging our future to pay it. But, on the other hand, and sorry Louise, it was ALP legend Barry Jones who, outlining his reasons for teaming up with John Hewson as patrons of the Truth and Integrity Project, lamented that on climate change Morrison is wicked, Barnaby Joyce is crazy or pretends to be so, and Labor is timid and fearful. So for me, that answers the question as to why I'm running as an independent. So terrified of being trapped by the government's deployment of the dark art of the wedge, Labor has ducked and dodged really important questions about our future. Didn't want to deal with the science about what we really need to do in relation to our emissions reduction targets for 2030. Didn't want to talk about setting a price on carbon or questioning AUKUS and asking where submarines will arrive or where they will be made, or a more humane refugee policy, or restoring progressive taxation to meet the needs of an ageing population, or phasing out negative gearing to make housing more affordable, or indeed what we've done about the public service being so hollowed out. On all of these issues, Labor has vacated the field. So we need an alternative. And I think this election we have seen the rise of the independence movement as a viable alternative and option for your number one vote. Thank you.
Finally, Louise Miller-Frost, standing for Labor.
Thank you, and thank you, Jo. Always a pleasure to follow Jo. My name's Louise Miller-Frost. I'm the Labor candidate for Boothby. My career's always been about delivering for our community. I've spent over 15 years working in community-based health services across the state. I've spent over 7 years in local government, again, doing local things, community development, economic development, a range of sorry, that's just gone up again, a range of things that really make a difference to our community. I'm also was the CEO of Catherine House, which is a women's homelessness service, and I most recently was the CEO of St Vincent de Paul, taking that organisation through the COVID pandemic, where we delivered services to people who were homeless, people who were in poverty across the state, and I've served on a number of boards. On a personal note, I'm the mother of triplets, and I have 3 stepsons. All of them are adults. And that drives my fear for our future, I have to say. When I look at what we are leaving for our next generation, I feel fearful. So I decided to run at this election because I was tired of the Morrison government's refusal to take responsibility. I was tired of the rorts, the scandals, the corruption. I was working in a job I loved, delivering really important services across the state, which was extremely meaningful. But I couldn't help worrying every time I saw the news and every time I read the paper about actually what was happening and what wasn't happening for our country. So I decided that if I wanted to see change, maybe I had to be the change. And so I put my hand up, and I have resigned my job, and I'm now campaigning full-time, because that's how important I think this election is, and that's how important the change is. We need a future where we take real action on climate change, where we strengthen Medicare, we fix aged care, where South Australians get secure, well-paid jobs, childcare cheaper.
One more.
Go to cowbell.
Okay.
Go to cowbell.
The only way we get change is to change the government, and that's why I'm here.
Thank you. It's too early for the cowbell, so...
I've still got one in the bag from last time.
Thank you all for your opening statements. It is now time for the questions sent to the event organisers. If it fits within the 2 minutes, I don't have a problem with it. I wasn't planning for that, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. I forgot to mention that, sorry. Anyone here? Thank you. So this is Graham Clark, who's not well, and an apology for tonight. His opening statement is, I decided to put my hand up to run as a candidate for Boothby because I was unhappy with what I was seeing from our politicians the last few years. I promise, if elected, to represent the people of Boothby with honesty, integrity and transparency. To do that, I will be holding regular focus groups for small business and sausage sizzles for the public, so that I am easily accessible to talk to about matters that are of concern to the community. Aside from supporting our party policies, I would support an investigation into corruption and into the actions taken by the government and senior bureaucrats during the pandemic. Of particular concern would be the coercion used to force vaccinations, the closure of small business while allowing big business to remain open, and the inconsistency of many of the decisions taken. My personal focus moving forward would be in ensuring that sporting clubs and community groups were better funded and had better facilities. That might be government money, but more likely it would be through sponsorship from contacts made as a Member of Parliament. I'm very community-minded and would like to see sporting and community groups help us heal as we move out of the pandemic. There's a copy of this statement on the table in the foyer, and it has Graham's contact details on there if you'd like to contact him with any questions. Thank you.
And on that note, I should probably also in that case mention that the candidate from the Animal Justice Party, Frankie Bray, is also an apology. She ended up being sick the last minute, so that's why she's not here. She didn't send me a statement to read, so we'll just leave it at that. Again, thank you for your opening statements. It's now time for the questions that were sent to the event organizers, and some of them by the event organizers. Candidates will have 1 minute to answer each question with a 10 seconds warning bell. These questions have been sent to the candidates in advance, so they could prepare considered and concise answers. The first one comes from the Blackwood Uniting Church, our hosting organization here. It's on priorities. Priorities are very telling in politics, so please focus only on the 2 top priorities that appear in the question. The question is, what are the top 2 priorities in order that you believe the incoming federal government should focus upon? We can go this way if you want.
Okay. I can't read Peter's out because it will take too long, more than a minute. There's a lot of priorities. I think there's too many to narrow it down to 2. I think for me, personally, as part of the party, I'd like to see environmental policies that are genuine and decent and thought out, and I mean environmental policies. And I think one of the most important things I'd like to personally see, and I hope that's okay, is I'd like to see a Bill of Rights introduced, a constitutional Bill of Rights that can be attached to our constitution so that our children can grow up knowing what their rights are. I think we've seen a perfect example over the past probably decade of the rights and liberties of Australians being taken away by unfair legislation and rushed legislation, and I'd like to see that change. So I'd like to see some empowerment of our children and better education for our children on those things so they can grow up knowing what their rights and liberties are.
Thank you.
So the first priority that we have in the Greens is integrity in politics. So we want to see a ban on corporate donations to political parties, and we want to stop the revolving door between Parliament, lobbyists and big industry. This is wrecking democracy in our country, and it's preventing us from getting the things that we need to serve the community. The second thing, which is tied in with that, is real action on climate change. And in the Greens, we want a 75% reduction in emissions by 2030 and net zero by 2035. We need to immediately stop the expansion of coal and gas and gradually transition that down to 100% renewable energy. Thank you.
Yes, there are several priorities, but two in particular. One is our ports are either leased or sold to communist-dominated countries. That should be an issue of main concern. I don't know whether you know the organisation, JBS, has literally invaded this country and bought all the major dairy farms, all the major meat farms, all the major salmon farms, poultry farms, piggeries, and there was no permission asked by the Australian people. Now, this organisation is renowned in the United States and Europe to bribe politicians to enter countries. And if I get to Canberra, that is one issue that I want to bring forward. Secondly, there are 28 listed pedophiles in Australian government and VIPs,
Wrap it up.
and we want them named.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That took an unexpected turn. My 2 priorities actually are the same as Jeremy's, slightly different emphasis though. Integrity for me is number 1, and I would like to see the immediate establishment of a robust and retrospective integrity commission. I think if we have an anti-corruption commission in Canberra, that will enable much better policy development, because at the moment our whole policy development process is corrupted by the influence of industry, whether that be in the offices of the ministers or it's just gas executives, for example, writing our energy policy. I think if we remove that kind of third-party corruption from our policy development process, that will enable better policy generally, and particularly around climate change, which, as I alluded to in my opening statement, is an existential crisis for us all. It is an emergency. There is, the International Energy Agency tells us, a very narrow path if we are to maintain a habitable planet. So we can't have any cul-de-sacs anymore. We need action. We need to get on with it.
Thank you.
Look, I've been the candidate now for 361 days, so what's important to me is making sure that I'm listening to the community and their priorities. What I have heard a lot of different things raised with me, but overwhelmingly at the moment it's cost of living and the economy. Those things are important to me because they are how we make everything tick. I've told you about my entire career being dedicated towards healthcare. That's something that I'm passionate about. It's the reason that I'm standing, but I know we can't deliver the kind of healthcare we need, particularly with an ageing population, unless we've got a thriving economy. And that's why making sure that we've got jobs to help people have secure incomes is critically important. We are at a 4% unemployment rate, heading down towards the 3%. That's an incredible position to be coming out of a pandemic. If we want to deliver strong action on climate change, we want the healthcare that our country deserves, then we need to make sure that our economy is thriving.
Thank you.
So my first priority is re-election on climate change. The Labor Party has a 43% target. We have policies that get us there. They've been independently modelled by an external agency. They are backed by the Business Council of Australia and the National Farmers Federation. We know we can actually get there. This is a crisis. We do need to start action. We've wasted the last 3 years since the last election. My second one is a National Anti-Corruption Commission. With teeth and retrospective, and one that can actually take referrals from anywhere. We have seen scandal after scandal after rort in this last 3 years in particular, and while it's very important to have a strong economy, if we're spending that money on rorts and deals with mates and wasting it, that's not a good use of our money. I want to see taxpayer money actually go to taxpayer services. An integrity commission will ensure that that happens.
Thank you. The second question comes from the Blackwood Sustainable Communities Group. It's on poverty and inequality. The question goes like this: given that we are one of the wealthiest countries in the world, why do we have so much increasing poverty and inequality? And if elected, what would you do to make us a fairer society? We can follow the same order if you want.
Well, that's an amazing question with too many answers. I grew up in the 70s, okay, and I grew up in a very, very good time. It was lots of opportunity, very good healthcare. Only one parent needed to work, and we lived very comfortably, and the society was very united. And one of the things our party must do is get us back to that. And I'm not talking about going back to the 70s either. The music was dreadful. But anyway, and... So, sorry, I had to make you laugh. We have to laugh through this. You know...
You just lost the election.
Yeah. Just lost the election. Actually, I like 70s music, I was lying. We really need to get back to basics. I mean, people just want to go home, they want to feel safe in their homes, they want to be able to think their children are getting a good education, which I doubt at times right now. They want to know that they can afford produce, fresh produce grown here and produced in Australia at affordable prices. I mean, we need to go back to basics right now. The major parties have been in power for 50 years, and I personally think they've taken us down the wrong path, and that's why our party was created, to change that. Thank you.
So there are two main reasons that came to mind when I saw this question for why we have such inequality in our society. One of them we've touched on already, which is corruption. We have a government that is taking donations from many industries, coal, gas, tobacco, weapons manufacturers, and then giving billions of dollars of our money back to those industries. So while we supposedly have a strong economy, that economy isn't working for most people. So corruption is one thing, and the other is it's about priorities. So we need a government that has the priorities around health, education, things like public transport that actually serve the community. And if we have a government with the right priorities, we will get more equality and a better standard of living for all of us, and an economy that actually works for the people. Thank you.
Yes, attending poverty. I believe that there's a simple answer to this. Our cost of living has gradually increased out of proportion. Our children can't afford deposits for home or to pay for extended mortgages. Our health services should be free if we are such a rich country. And the only answer to this is to reduce our cost of living. And the only way we're going to do that is introduce a 2% across the board consumption tax and eliminate all taxes. We've done the sums, and we could raise somewhere in the vicinity of $2.4 trillion a year, which would be sufficient to run this country. If we can drop the cost of living, it'll improve all services and affordabilities.
I think that we have increasing inequality and poverty because we choose to do so. We're a very rich country. We do not have to have people living in poverty here in Australia. We can make different choices. We can have different priorities. What we can immediately do to lift people out of poverty is that we can increase the income support payments that are being paid to our most vulnerable. We can take actions that will increase our stagnating wages. The government has those powers. It is a very large employer itself. It can restructure the industrial relations system so that people who are in very precarious work in the new gig economy, which is going back decades really in terms of the terms of conditions under which workers are working for our own convenience. We are making those choices every day. I think they are the wrong choices, and I think we need people in Parliament who are going to call them out.
A really important question. I've obviously spent a considerable part of my career working with people from underprivileged communities, and so what I know from my first-hand experience working up in Cape York with Indigenous communities, working in Africa, is that the things that actually help break the cycle are quality healthcare, good education, a job and a roof over your head. I know from a clinical perspective that you can actually provide someone with the best quality of healthcare available, but if they don't have security in a job and a house, then it actually doesn't change their clinical outcome. Making sure that we provide everyone with access to high quality education, that we work on healthcare that focuses on prevention and early intervention, which is complex and has upfront costs, but actually delivers the best possible outcome for people over the course of their life, is how we can break the cycle of poverty and inequality. And I know that from my first-hand experience working in that sector.
So likewise, I have worked directly with people in poverty. I ran Anti-Poverty Week for a couple of years, and obviously Catherine House and Vinnie's focus very much on people who have lost everything. We are a prosperous country, and as Joe says, we actually choose to have that gap between income, high income and low income. Inflation's at 5.1% and only rising, and wages have stagnated for 9 years, and that was a decision of the government. Matthias Cormann said it was a design feature of their economic model to have that. Insecure work is another part of that, where people are, sure they're working, but they're only working gig economy. They're not actually getting a living wage. We have policies that favour the privileged in education, in health, and the latest one proposed by the Morrison government, superannuation for housing, is forcing people in the lower end of income to choose whether they're going to have a retirement income or they're going to have a house. That's unacceptable. We choose that.
Thank you. The next two questions are a bit more specific. They come from the Blackwood Business Network, one of the host organizers. The first one is about the commercial precinct. It requires a little bit of a preamble, so bear with me for a minute. The Blackwood district needs a master plan to guide future development in the commercial precinct. We have limited real estate, and the shopping, community and entertainment needs of our population need to be incorporated into a sensible plan to meet the needs of our community for at least 30 years into the future. We have a growing population, especially since the development of Craigburn Farm, with a further 2,000 residents, with no additional infrastructure planned to meet this population. While we have a draft master plan in progress, we need funds to develop more formal concept plans and artist impressions so that we can engage stakeholders and progress this project. Key issues such as lack of parking, outdated shopping facilities, insufficient mix of shops, no entertainment and community facilities within the centre. Could you commit to funds to support this project?
Okay, I'll start by having Pete's answer here because Peter's from this area. So Peter replied, I grew up in Blackwood. I've seen the evolution of the Craigburn Farm community, which I used to live opposite in Cummings Street. In my view, the business town centre has always been disparate, difficult and sometimes dangerous to navigate around the area, and is not good for a natural flow of commercial enterprises. I think a master plan is critical and that major infrastructure works are required from multiple perspectives, including business, logistics and safety. All tiers of government should be engaged and committed to funding the evolution of the Blackwood area. I will work with local community to make that happen. And I'll finish by saying that we did apply to the federal government to get so that our experts in policy could come up with funding figures, and we didn't get the facts and figures we needed for our guys to do something. So we can't make any offers of financial offers at this stage.
So this type of issue clearly requires multiple levels of government, so local, state and potentially some federal government input. In the Greens, we are intending to establish a $3 billion fund for communities, and this will allocate funding to local communities based on an independent assessment of applications with clear criteria and transparent decision making. The reason for this is to stop governments from using corrupted processes, what we know as pork barrelling, and instead have a fair process that's based on community need. So I'm talking about federal funding here. I expect that community facilities in Craigburn Farm and similar places would qualify for funding, and I would advocate for this where appropriate. Thank you.
Yes, the Blackwood community precinct always has been a problem. We haven't been able to reach a decision on the format, and it's become more intense with Craigburn development. I would be happy to represent the Blackwood community in providing federal funding to support this, and also, of course, to redirect the freight trains, which has been an issue for several years, and also to stop using South Australia as a nuclear dump as well.
Thank you.
Well, I live on the plains section of this great electorate, so I was not familiar with all of the issues in great detail, but having had the opportunity to speak to Jane about this, it does seem to me, I would echo Jeremy's thoughts, it does require input from all levels of government, and being able to navigate through them and negotiate with them is something that I've done very frequently in my arts career. But I also agree with Jeremy that it is important that major infrastructure projects are assessed independently and for the contribution that they can make both to their local community and to the greater good. Now, the amount of money that would be required for a draft master plan is not a huge amount, and it does seem that it would be, if as your local member, it is something that you would be able to negotiate and secure so that a plan, a proper, fully developed plan can be developed. Once you have a plan, then it is, well, it's your calling card to make the case for funding to see it realised. And I think there's lots of opportunity here in Blackwood for wonderful community engagement around this issue.
I think it's something that's long overdue. I grew up just down the bottom of the hill, but my best friend lives 2 streets over. So I remember parking being an issue when I was about 12, and it's still an issue. Look, as the federal member, if I were elected, I can commit to working with the council and the state government, because that is what needs to happen, and it also has to include community consultation. It is a complex problem. This area was never designed. You've got the complexities of being in the hills, bushfire concerns, and so to make sure that you're making the right investment, you do need to develop a proper plan. That really needs to originate through the council and the state government, but I would be a firm proponent in supporting you getting towards a master plan and bringing together the right partners if I were elected, and certainly once you have the plan together, we know that this is an investment that the federal government should consider very seriously.
Thanks. Look, I was really pleased to hear about this when Deputy Opposition Leader Richard Miles came to town. We met with Jane and with the Blackwood Business Network, so thank you for that, Jane. It clearly is an area that has grown organically over time, and master planning can obviously help with that. My background is through local government. I've been involved in a number of master planning exercises. They do require different levels of government, and obviously council is very heavily involved, but also private landholders, businesses and residents, because at the end of the day this actually has to work for the local community, and the only way to do that is actually to have community involvement. So I would say that there's a business case there to be made, and I would think it would be supported.
Thank you again. The next question is again from the Blackwood Business Network with a smaller preamble. It's about road infrastructure and traffic management. The Mitcham Hills is well known for the limited exits out of the area. This causes congestion during peak traffic times and concerns if there is a need for mass exits in an emergency. This is of particular concern for residents of Craigburn Farm. We have a proposal for a western bypass road behind Craigburn Farm and exiting onto Shepherd's Hill Road, with a number of connector roads from Craigburn Farm. This project will require a major injection of federal funds, but will be an imperative solution for the future. How can you or how will you support such a proposal?
Well, I think that's a really good reason to vote for Peter Harris. He lives in the area. He's an amazing negotiator. He's the leader of our political party. And not only that, if he's elected, he'll be in a balance of power situation in the federal government, which means the federal government will have to negotiate with him, whichever is elected, at some stage, and that gives him more pull and more power to bring more resources to this area. There's been a few hung parliaments in the past, and you'll find if you check the history of Australian politics that those independents and minor parties that have taken those seats, or new parties like ours, have had a lot more pull, and their electorates have had the most funded in the country. So good reason to vote for Peter.
So specifically on the Craigburn Farm Western Bypass, this has been assessed by traffic engineers, and they found that it was of doubtful effectiveness and also likely to be expensive and environmentally damaging. I'm an engineer. I work with a lot of traffic engineers, and we all share a concern about the approach to transport and infrastructure in this country. Adelaide is one of the the most car dependent city in Australia, and it's one of the most car dependent in the world, and we have a really bad case of urban sprawl in this city. It's not normal what we're doing in Australia. In the rest of the world they're tackling these problems by taking different approaches, but we seem to be continuing to make the same mistakes over and over again. We need to understand that we cannot fix traffic by building bigger roads and more roads. It's not the solution. We need public transport, proper public transport, serious investment in it, and investment in walking and cycling. This isn't to try and force everyone to catch the train. It's to give people options for alternative forms of transport and to clear the roads for people who need them. Thank you.
I'm not alone as an independent. There are 10 other candidates spread across Australia. I believe that if we can get at least 10 seats in Parliament, we'll have enough energy and enough convincing to be able to support projects like this. Yes, Craigburn Farm road facility is a problem. It has to be attended to, and we need federal funding to make it work. Thank you.
Look, I think because this area has grown up organically and because there has been expansion of residential areas without matching that with infrastructure, there is a problem. And we need to tackle these problems before they become crises and emergencies. So investing in mitigation action so that we don't realise that we should have done this before as the bushfires are sweeping through Blackwood is really significant. I can't comment on the specific proposal here because I'm not a traffic engineer, and I do think those things need to be assessed by experts and independently and transparently. But I do believe that action needs to be taken, and let's not wait for the problem to grow.
I agree with some of that, Joe. Crazy.
On our last forum.
Look, I don't purport to be an expert in the traffic engineering from Craigburn Farm, but I do recognise that it's a problem. We do need to make sure that there's adequate infrastructure for when people need to commute, but also if you do need to get out in an emergency. The way funding works for these programs is that if it's in a metropolitan area, once the state government puts a traffic solution to the federal government, if the federal government supports it, it's a 50-50 split. So if there was a proposal and it showed that this was the right thing to do, I'd support it as long as it took into account the environmental implications, because I recognise some of the recent proposals like the Labor pitch on Majors Road take out significant parts of Glenthorne Park, and I don't think that that's the right choice to trade off national parks for road infrastructure. I would also implore you as a member of the CFS, if it is a high-risk bushfire day or extreme risk, you should be leaving the night before. I know that's not always the most attractive option, but it does put our CFS personnel at risk if we have to come in to try and get people out. So in a crisis, please endeavour to leave before the crisis hits.
Still safe to crowd.
So access to Craigburn Farm, and specifically in an emergency, is one of the things that I hear frequently when I'm door knocking, and I hear the same from my Mayo colleague who door knocks in Craigburn Farm. As to what the actual solution is, again, I'm not a traffic engineer, so I'm not going to try and guess what that is, but it's clear a solution does need to be found. We know that there is the $4.8 billion Emergency Prevention Fund that is sitting unspent. Perhaps that might be a source of funding if a consensus solution can be found that will actually resolve the issue that we're looking at. So I think it's really important that we actually get that consensus issue. We have the correct traffic engineering information that comes in and tells us what is the answer. I agree with Jeremy, it would be great to have more public transport, but in an emergency we actually need the access out so that people can get out, and that is a priority.
Thank you. The next question comes from the Blackwood Reconciliation Group. It's on reconciliation. The Blackwood Reconciliation Group continues to endorse the Uluru Statement from the Heart and strongly believe that significant action is needed in this next term of federal government. In particular, that we, the Australian people, be given our chance to decide through a referendum on establishing a constitutionally enshrined voice to Parliament. What specific action would you take if elected?
That's a little bit easier for me. I know Peter's views on this. Peter spends a lot of time with our Indigenous people. We have Indigenous people running for our party. We have Indigenous advisors. I'm on the Canberra Law Council for the Aboriginal people, and I'll be the spokesperson in South Australia for the Aboriginal community as well. So it's very, very important, but I would not 100% stand directly behind this concept simply because I'm not sure that it's been agreed to by all of the nations, Aboriginal nations, and I think I want to confirm that first. If so, I think it's a good idea, but I think constitutionally it may not be the best thing for them, the best way of moving forward, and that would be I would like to speak to the elders myself and get them together and know that that is what they want. At the Tent Embassy where we've put together a treaty, I think a treaty is a much better option for the Aboriginal people to give them self-determination. Thank you.
In the Greens, we wholeheartedly support the Uluru Statement from the Heart. This means constitutional change to establish a First Nations voice to Parliament, In the Greens, we will establish a National Truth and Justice Commission to investigate human rights abuses against First Nations people, and we will commence a national consultation process to work towards treaty. We also want an increase in the age of legal responsibility to 14, noting that Aboriginal children are disproportionately affected by incarceration. We want to double funding for legal assistance services and establish a First Nations Legal Defence Fund. We want funding also for community-led First Nations health services. In the Greens, we have 9 senators currently. 2 of them are First Nations women. On our Senate ticket for South Australia this time, we have Uncle Moogie Sumner, who's a Nurrunjeri elder. So in the Greens, our policy is led by First Nations people. Thank you.
One of our candidate members by the name of Ricardo Bossi has made significant inroads into talking to the Aboriginal people and trying to create a unity, a permanent unity. We believe that we've reached that. It's not official yet, but the outcome of these negotiations is an agreement that we believe in one flag, one people, for one nation. And all the Aboriginals that we've spoken to are all in agreement of that. And before we consider any constitution issues, we should consult the elders as to whether or not they would be in agreement with that.
Well, I'm very passionate about reconciliation with our First Nations peoples, and I'm 100% committed to a referendum on the Uluru Statement in the term of the next Parliament. The Uluru Statement was agreed after one of the most rigorous consultation processes that has ever taken place in this country, and consensus was developed by the communities after consultation with Aboriginal people of all ages, but particularly bringing in cultural authority through the elders. Indeed, this would be a non-negotiable term for me to guarantee confidence and supply to either of the major parties should I be elected and in the event of there being a hung parliament. I think we should be thanking the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters for the generosity with which they have offered us the Uluru Statement from the heart, and we should hold out our hands to them in friendship so that we can all walk together on the trek across this great country that they have invited us to join. We can then look forward to the ancient sovereignty of their peoples shining through as the best and fullest expression of Australia's nationhood. It is beyond time.
I'm a firm proponent of the Uluru Statement from the heart. As I mentioned earlier, I worked for a considerable amount of time up in Cape York with Noel Pearson, who was one of the key proponents of this. The constitutional lawyers tell us that this is the right model and this can work. I'm absolutely committed to taking it to a referendum, as is the Liberal Party. What I would make the point is that we need to make sure we bring the whole community along with us before we have a referendum. Just some basic statistics for you. Out of 19 referenda that we've had in this country, posing 44 questions, only 8 have passed. So I want this from the bottom of my heart, but I want to make sure that we do this in a way that it is assured that it will get the support of the community, because that's how we deliver an outcome and a real result for our First Nations people.
Thank you. The Labor Party has committed to implementing Uluru Statement from the Heart in full in its first term, including the referendum. I thank Joe for giving us the context. It is a very generous offer by our First Nations people who got together and self-organised and told us that this is what they want: voice, treaty, truth, in that order, and we have committed to that fully. We're also committed to ensuring that we look at health services and housing and education and the other things that actually affect people's lives in remote communities, and also Aboriginal people living in urban areas. The Close the Gap has not closed the gap, to be blunt, and it is something that as Australians we need to continue to work on.
The next question comes from the Blackwood Hills Circle of Friends. It's on refugees. It's initially directed to Louise, Rachel, and Joe for reasons that become apparent, but it's open for everyone to engage with the question. This is the statement that precedes the question. Among the promotional materials from the 3 candidates delivered to our letterboxes, we noticed no mention of refugees or displaced persons. So the question for everyone is, what is your policy regarding refugees and displaced persons?
You know, the one thing we're lacking, we seem to see lacking, not just in Parliament, but in our general communities in the past few years, is compassion and empathy for each other. I think we've become too busy in the world to look after others. And one of the biggest problems we have is that we should be and could be easily looking after a lot more people from overseas that are suffering. But we have to also look at the fact that we have people here sleeping hard, that we have people sleeping in their cars, that we have people that families and children that can't put a roof over their head at the moment. We have people struggling to feed themselves. So we need to really address, as I said before, the grassroots, so that we can make sure that when they come here, that they're welcomed, that they can get a job, and they can put a roof over their head, and they can have the affordable support services that we used to all enjoy. Thank you. Thank you.
It was social justice which brought me to the Greens, and that means looking after people who are here, like Mark's just said, and also showing compassion to those who are coming to us for help. And so I believe we need to be doing a lot better as a country, and our treatment of refugees in the last decade or so has been really shameful. So in the Greens, we want to end offshore detention. We want to increase Australia's humanitarian intake to 50,000 per year and provide an additional 4,000 places for refugees from Afghanistan, similarly for refugees from Ukraine. We want to establish a regional solution for people seeking asylum, and we want to push for a faster, fairer and more affordable family reunion visa system. It's quite cruel, the system we have at the moment. And we want to limit the time for onshore detention and provide fair support for refugees. And finally, abolishing temporary protection visas and reintroducing permanent protection visas so refugees can rebuild their lives and contribute to our country. Thank you.
Yes, we have a repair issue in Australia here. There are a lot of people unemployed. There are a lot of businesses that have gone broke as a result of the last 3 years. Now, that's the first job. There's no point in increasing our intake if we can't give them work. I'm all for supporting refugees and reducing the amount of time they're spending in jail, because that's exactly what it is. We need to process them very quickly. But again, we got to get to the core roots of our economy and build our strength in employment and lower our cost of living. Thank you.
Well, it was the Labor Party's treatment of refugees actually that triggered my break from them at the turn of the century. I'm sorry that I didn't have it in my material. It might just be because I only had 2 small pieces of material as an independent. That's all I could afford. But I'm very passionate about this issue. I agree actually with Jeremy on a lot of these issues. We do need to immediately scrap temporary protection visas. We should be scrapping offshore detention. And we should be scrapping offshore processing, certainly in the way that it's been conducted over the last 10 to 20 years. We need to increase the places, and then we need to make sure those places are actually filled, because we know that the Department of Home Affairs, so vociferously criticised by the National Audit Office for the way that it goes about its business, often has there are extra places announced and then they are not filled. And we saw that even as Kabul was falling with the Afghans who'd been there helping alongside our soldiers. They were unable to get the visas that had been designed specifically for them due to the legalism that was being employed by the department. So there's lots that we could do very quickly that would alleviate some of our shame of the last 10 years.
So I have to disagree with Paul, given that we have the lowest unemployment rate in 48 years in this country. Actually, we need to benefit from more refugees and more migration. We currently have 160,000 places for migration, whether that's family reuniting visas, skilled migrants, but we also have 13,750 refugee places in addition to the 4-year 31,500 dedicated places for refugees for Afghanistan. I think it's absolutely fair and reasonable in a country like Australia that we should continue to challenge ourselves for how many people we can offer and extend that support. I've obviously spent a considerable amount of my time, particularly when I was in Rwanda, on the border with Uganda and the Congo, at refugee camps where people are desperate to be able to get to a country like Australia. So I want to make sure that we have those opportunities for everyone, and when we do bring people to Australia, then we make sure they have access to all the services that our country offers the rest of us, because that's how we can ensure people thrive in Australia.
Likewise, I also believe that we can have strong borders without being cruel. I think that our policies of recent time have been cruelty for cruelty's sake. So the Labor Party has committed to sending the Mugarappan family back to Biloela. We will... we are in favour of offshore processing, but not detention. And what I mean by that is most people coming to Australia come through a third-party country. We used to have a processing centre in Indonesia where the refugee camps were, so no one had to get onto boats to get to Australia. I don't know why that was closed. We should have processing where people are. They should have rapid processing. Other countries can do it in 14 days. We should be aiming for that sort of processing. They should have outcomes, clear outcomes, and there should be a pathway for permanency for those people who are judged to be refugees. We would also be looking at ending temporary protection visas and turning them into permanent protection visas.
The final questions come up from individuals. This one is on COVID policies. There were several questions that revealed concerns regarding some of the policies implemented to deal with the pandemic. What is your position regarding border closures, quarantine, lockdowns, and vaccination mandates to address pandemics such as COVID-19?
Only 1 minute. It's been disturbing. I think it's been disturbing. I think it's been handled poorly. I have, amongst my candidates, around 70 professionals from around Australia that lost their jobs for dare even questioning the agenda. Experts that, from cardiologists and people in the health field for 30 and 40 years that lost their jobs, and nurses that lost their jobs, when it could have been, I think that's enough to say, and I'll tell you my experience simply. My cardiologist said to me that you shouldn't get the jab for the purposes that I have a heart issue and it may cause trouble. And I then went back to him and said, this is causing me trouble, I can't go anywhere, I can't do anything. I said, could I please have an exemption? He told me if he writes me an exemption, he loses his job. Now that is a part of many issues that were handled poorly by both governments in this situation.
So globally, countries which rapidly adopted vaccination and quarantine programs achieved far better results than those who didn't. The US and Brazil had millions of deaths by taking a relaxed approach. Vaccines saved thousands of lives in Australia, and more lives could have been saved if we had a faster rollout of vaccines and international quarantine. Thank you.
Well, I'm in agreement with Mark. How many of you people seen the 9 pages of adverse effects by Pfizer with a suppression order of 70 years? Fortunately, it wasn't allowed by the Supreme Court in United States. Now, if you want to believe the media and the spin that they give about COVID-19, well, we deserve to be in the mess that we're in.
I agree with a lot of what Jeremy had to say. My only opposition to a lot of the measures that we put in place were border closures, whether de facto or de jure for Australian citizens. I thought the way we abandoned our fellow Australians trapped overseas to their fate was appalling. The government's original reassurance was that their travails would only last until we could prepare for them by building more quarantine capacity and flattening the curve, but that proved hollow. So no effort was made to build quarantine facilities, and the stranded Aussies were not home by the promised Christmas. We did discover at that point that there were two tiers of Australian citizens. There were us who were here and them who were not. Indian Australians copped it even worse, of course. They would probably have pondered the worth of Australian citizenship if it could no longer be assured to grant you entry into Australian. Julian Assange may have a thought or two about the diminution of Australian citizenship over the last few years. Just thought I'd slip that in.
Well, I guess I should preface this by saying that my career has been working on infectious diseases, so polio eradication, staring down Ebola, which is the deadliest virus known to humankind in West Africa, and working on COVID. Look, my position is I'm a liberalist, so I do believe in the rights of the individual to make a choice. But as a public health expert, I'm a firm proponent of vaccines. Vaccines globally prior to COVID-19 save between 4 and 6 million lives every single year. So they're incredibly important to all of our community, particularly our most vulnerable. Now, taking the COVID vaccine is a choice, but the clinical evidence is overwhelmingly clear that it reduces the risk of severe infection, and I'm an advocate for it. But I recognise people's right to make that choice. Where that's different is in the healthcare system, where you sign a contract when you join that says that you'll have vaccines as the hospital or health system in which you work requests or requires you to do so. So whilst I support people's freedom of choice, I'm a very firm proponent of being vaccinated because I know it saves lives.
Well, Rachel, I actually agree with you.
We got there.
We finally got there. So I've also spent many years in the health system, and I obviously have not been at Ebola, but I have seen people who suffered for a number of illnesses and had lifelong disability from it. I very much support vaccines. I have a Masters of Public Health. I've worked in the area. I absolutely agree that vaccines save lives. I do support people's right to choose. However, I also get around in aged care and disability circles, and I can tell you that some of those people are terrified because they know if they get COVID and they turn up in hospital, they are not the ones who will be put on the respirator. They will be judged as being less likely to be able to be saved than a healthy person, a normal person, and they know that. So I think they have a right to protect themselves as well.
Thanks again. The final question prepared in advance is on foreign aid. It requires a little bit of a preamble, but I'll cut it short a little bit. Australia's budget for foreign aid measured as percentage of gross national income is currently at a record low level. If it is tough for Australia to handle the challenges of climate change and COVID-19, how much harder it must be for our Pacific neighbour countries, some of whom fear for their future existence. What is your foreign aid policy? Will it result in a budget increase as percentage of gross national income? And in view of the recent concern over the Solomon Islands, can you explain how your foreign aid policy relates to your foreign policy for the Pacific region?
Well, that's a hard one because we haven't finished our foreign policy, but I personally, in my 20 years, have followed it very carefully. And we send money overseas. We send a decent amount of money overseas. Maybe we should increase that. But what we do need is to land where it's needed, and it doesn't happen. You can spend as much money as you like and send it across to foreign nations, but it's no good for anybody, including the people suffering in those countries, if the money doesn't trickle down. I would like to see an increase in resources sent over there. We have people here not working. Let's get over there and build the infrastructure they need. Let's look at improving their water sources. Let's help them and educate them to grow what they need. Okay, that's my opinion, and our policy will probably reflect something like that, because I do have a say sometimes in the policy production. Thank you.
So the Greens policy is to increase overseas aid to 0.7% of gross national income, as per the question, by 2030. It's not only the right thing to do as a wealthy country, but it's also good for our national security. Australia has the highest carbon footprint per capita in the world. We're also the third largest exporter of fossil fuels. So I believe we have a responsibility to assist our neighbours who are less wealthy and are bearing the costs of climate change to an existential extent, in terms of potentially losing their homes. So our Pacific neighbours, we should be looking after them. We haven't. Our current government has actually shown them a great deal of disrespect about the plight they find themselves in. Our approach to foreign policy and national security in the Greens is to use diplomatic relationships rather than military force. Thank you.
Yeah, our policy to foreign aid is quite clear. There's an old saying, you provide a fish to someone that is hungry is one thing, is only temporary. Teach him how to fish and he can feed himself for life. That is the sort of foreign aid we need to provide these countries, and we have the resources to be able to do that, and we have enough unemployment to be able to satisfy that need. And that's our view. Countries should be able to be trained to help themselves and not continuously provide just foreign aid for the sake of it. Yes, it is required, but we should also teach them to be able to secure their own aid. Thank you.
Well, the internationally agreed development assistance target is 0.7% of gross domestic income, and we are such a long way from that, and our contribution internationally is falling, slated to fall even further over the next financial year. We've seen the cuts from the last 9 years, really, since the election of the Abbott government, to offset increases in defence spending, and that is such a poor substitute. I think foreign aid and foreign policy are separate but related. I think it was a shame and a mistake to abolish, or to conflate the two by essentially abolishing AusAid, or WasAid as it's known now in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, sadly. We do need to balance the strategic interests of Australia, but fundamentally I believe that we should take a human rights approach to the way our foreign aid is delivered, that focuses on raising people out of poverty through investment in humans, education, essential infrastructure, and from that I think good things will flow. We haven't taken seriously the concerns of our neighbours, whether particularly about climate change, but also about our exploitative temporary labour visas. All right, I'll stop. I had another few sentences. I thought I could squeeze
No, if there's another sentence, I'm happy.
So obviously I've spent a lot of my career working with overseas foreign aid. So currently this financial year overseas foreign aid is $4.55 billion. I did the math and I don't get the same G&I percentage, I get 0.5%, so I'm happy to take that offline with whoever submitted the question, but I'm not quite sure how that math's worked out. Look, I think it's incredibly important. I'm a firm advocate in supporting our near neighbours, but countries around the globe to build infrastructure, to help with education, to help with healthcare. Those numbers that I mentioned don't include the $2.7 billion in loans that we offer. It doesn't include where we deploy our defence, not just for military action, but for support and infrastructure roles. And so the holistic problem is about making sure that we strengthen other countries, because that's good for them and it's good for securing their future prosperity as nations, which helps with our national security. It was a long question for 1 minute.
Look, recent activity in the Solomon Islands, I think, has shown a failure of our foreign diplomacy program. We know that over the last 9 years, $12 billion has been cut from the foreign aid program. Part of that was also the ABC Pacific program, which we broadcast out to our Pacific neighbours, our views of the world, our news, our life. And of course, as soon as that was cut, China jumped in, and China now does that. So they are now broadcasting their views of the world and their news. So that was about winning the hearts and minds, and we dropped the ball on that. Labor has a long-term target to reach 0.5% of gross national income, and as part of that policy, as the first step, Penny Wong's announced 2 components of the aid program, boosting Australian official development assistance for Pacific countries and Timor-Leste by $525 million over the next 4 years, and boosting the Australian official development assistance to Southeast Asia by $470 million. And I would also say I completely agree, we need to be doing the right thing on climate change, because our Pacific neighbours really care about it.
You're right. You were so well behaved. We have lots of time for questions from the floor, which is great. So this brings us to the time for the open Q&A. We have time for questions from the floor. So please, there will be a roving mic, it's my understanding. Introduce yourself, name and the area from Boothby you're from is enough. Formulate as far as possible direct questions, and if the question needs a preamble, please make it as short as possible. I will have to cut short preambles, but go for too long if that happens.
Nina Marnie, Nainari Tamaroo. My name is Tamaroo, I'm a local Ghana elder and also a co-chair of the Blackwood Reconciliation Group. We appreciate you answering our questions with honesty. But my role in life is to educate non-Aboriginal kids about my culture and my language. What are your thoughts on having my language as part of the curriculum in the education space? And just for the Labor Party person up the front, I did not see your name on Emily's Burke's. I'm going to teach the Labor Party language on Thursday. So I would like to see your name on that list. Dr. Swift, welcome. You've got big shoes to fill. One of my dear friends is Nicole Flint, and I met you when the Prime Minister was here and welcomed him to my country. Would really like you to encourage teaching the local Ghana language in the education space. Thoughts, please.
Thank you.
So start here.
Do we
targeted? Sorry.
I don't mind.
I think it's a great idea. In fact, I'm with an organisation called Black Deafs Australia, which is about keeping our kids out of jail and looking at the poor results of what happens when they end up in jail. And we have groups that take the kids out, the local Aboriginal kids out bush and teach them, traditional ways and traditional values. And I think they've started taking out their friends, their white friends, if you want to use the terrible terminology of black and white. And I think it's amazing. I think it's just brilliant. And I think, I grew up, I think we learnt French at school, and I could count to about 6 or something. And I did 2 years of French, I think, at high school, can't remember any of it. And my Aboriginal friends have been trying to teach me their language for years. It's really hard. So I think at a younger age, it'd be great to see them learning something like that. So great idea. I love it. Thank you.
I don't mind any order you want.
Right. Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you. One thing I mentioned earlier is that I'm leading the engineering for the Aboriginal Art and Cultures Centre in the city. And one of the things that my team have been doing is having Ghana language lessons from Jack Buckskin. I've been missing them because I've been on the campaign, which has been unfortunate, but they've been getting a lot out of it. I share Mark's thoughts. I learnt French in high school, which I didn't use, and I feel quite embarrassed about the limited knowledge that I have of Ghana language in particular, and I would love to see it taught in schools. I think that'd be amazing. So great idea.
Yes, we are so privileged to have the oldest culture in our country. And yes, I'm all for teaching languages, the Aboriginal language in schools, but not only that, they're spiritual teachings. You know, they've been handed down over thousands and thousands of years, and that's something we could, as settlers here, we could learn a lot from. So to repeat my previous comment, we believe in one flag, one nation, one people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Look, I also think it's a fantastic idea. When I was General Manager of Bangarra Dance Theatre, we went around Australia and I was fortunate enough to engage with a number of different communities and cultures and languages from our First Nations people, but actually more focused on the Northern Territory and up in Arnhem Land with the Yolngu culture. So I think it would be wonderful to embed learning of the Ngarrindjeri language down here in South Australia. It would be empowering and inspiring, I think, for all students from whatever background they come.
Fantastic question, Tamaru. So I actually grew up in New Zealand, which means that when I was in primary school, I learnt Maori as well as English. I then went on to be a bit of a failed French speaker and then learnt Kinyarwanda when I lived in Rwanda. I think it's incredibly important for our young people to have that language connection. I think it's particularly important because there are often very few people speaking some of the different dialects that we have across Australia. So I've worked on projects that are also looking to preserve some of that language, both in recordings, but also creating apps that have AI capabilities so that they can learn and help instruct other Indigenous young people, but also all Australians to help make sure that we preserve that language, because some of the ways in which foreign languages and Indigenous languages work actually change the way you think about place. I know one of the languages up in Cape York talks about where you are when you ask someone how they are. The response is where you are in a geographical position. And I found that quite fascinating because it's how people think about the land and their connection with the land. So I think there's a lot that we need to preserve, and I'd be absolutely thrilled if we could integrate that into our early curriculum, even younger than schools. That was generous.
Thank you, Uncle Tamaru. I didn't actually recognise you too far down for me. Look, I also agree. I think language is a really important part about understanding culture, and it's important for us as Australians to understand the culture of our First Nation wherever we are. I should warn you that when I worked in Aboriginal health in SA Health, I had largely Ngarrindjeri staff who told me that I needed speech therapy because I can't roll my R's, so I can't actually say any of the words. So I'm really keen to do some Ghana language, but if you want me to roll my R's, I'm going to need speech therapy.
Can I see a few hands so I can have a picture of how many questions? Let's go with this. I think I can see a lady with a glove. Well, yeah, one of the ladies.
Good evening, I'm Kathy Byrne. I'm number 1 Senate candidate for the Australian Federation Party. I'm a former health professional. I was a mental health RN, and prior to that I was a registered general nurse. And I'm quite alarmed at our broken health system in South Australia and indeed across Australia. It seems that each successive government keeps blaming each other, and we go around in circles and we don't ever have any resolve. So what is the position from your parties with regarding the ramping crisis, the lack of beds, the lack of staff, lack of training options? What is the position of your party on that, please?
Thank you.
I would normally refer that to my lead Senate candidate, but she just asked the question, so it's not going to help. I've done a lot of research over 20 years what's happened with healthcare, and many of you people here just might be of the age to remember the 70s when we had 17 beds per thousand in this country, and now we're down to below 2. I think it's below 2, it could be 2.2 beds per thousand. So in the last 30 or 40 years, at the helm of the major parties, we have seen our healthcare demise radically and at all levels, whether it be mental health, whether it be support services in the evening. And I could tell you stories, I won't, because none of them are any good. And every time I've tried to help somebody, it's been very, very hard to find support services for them. So I think we need to change and go back to investing in healthcare at a much greater level. And we should also consider the fact that we lost a lot of our healthcare workers through the mandates that probably would have kept working. Thank you.
Anyone who wants, I'm happy to go with that.
All right. Well, some of the panellists have some expertise or a lot of expertise in healthcare, which I don't. But the thing I would say is, and you've probably heard me say this already tonight, is it's an issue of priorities and it's an issue of funding. So at the moment we have a government which often says they can afford some things and not others, but they seem quite willing to give $11.6 billion every year in subsidies to the coal and gas industry. That's one example. So we have money being spent in the wrong places, and the priority should be on looking after people, especially in health. And so in the Greens we want to see greater funding for health and taking that money from places that it shouldn't be spent, like subsidies for the coal and gas industry. We also want to see healthcare being free in this country, like it is in other parts of the world. And a bit of detail, we want Medicare to include dental and also mental health. Thank you.
Yes, I agree with Jeremy. We believe that health benefits should be free in this country. We should be able to afford that, and we should be able to structure that. Particularly with mental health, I've been a counselling psychotherapist for 32 years, and I'm well aware of the child suicide rate. We should be preventing that to curb that in the early stages. Many of my clients come to me and say they just can't get in to see a psychologist. It's a very common complaint. And there are over 12,000 counselling psychotherapists in Australia that don't have access to the mental health system. Now that is appalling.
That's a good place to
right, okay.
leave it at that. Otherwise it's going to take another. Joe.
Well, how much money we put into the health system and where we direct it is a question of priorities. I think it has been seen that a lot of the issues that we had around ramping, some of them, have been to do with triage, which is required because we haven't invested earlier, whether it's in early intervention around mental health or it's just investing in different stages of our health system generally. So I think that we do need to look at the structure that ensures that people who don't need to be in emergency don't end up there because there are no other options for them. I completely agree that it makes no sense at all to kind of carve off parts of our health, whether that's dental or mental health, and say that despite our ostensibly universal health system, somehow they are not part of it, and they should also be included within Medicare.
So I think I probably said this to you this morning, but my focus is moving care to lower acuity settings. That means moving away from hospitals and much more care into secondary level and primary level, but even more importantly than that, prevention and early intervention, which is what I've spent my career working on. We know that that's the best outcome for a patient, where you treat them early or you prevent a condition, but actually the health economics stack up. It costs a lot up front, but the reality is over the lifetime of a patient, it ends up being cheaper and a better outcome if we can deliver prevention or early intervention. There are a whole lot of pieces to that puzzle, but one of the ones that I just flagged, because it is inextricably correlated with the ramping challenges, is that a lot of the patients that clog up emergency beds are mental health and drug and alcohol. I've made a commitment this election of $12.6 million to a kids' Head to Health hub right here in Boothby, because what we know is 50% of all mental health challenges that someone will experience in their life originate before the age of 14. It may sound shocking to say 0 to 12, But that is what prevention really means. It means getting in early, and that means that you're not just treating the individual, you're treating the caregiving unit around that individual, because often if they're older, they're not as willing to bring others into that journey to support their mental health. That's just one example. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Kathy. So Labor has committed $1 billion to a Medicare review that will look at item numbers, it will look at how they're paid, it will look at increasing bulk billing. Again, this is about largely GPs and community-based health services, so that's prevention and early intervention. Like Rachel, that's where my background is, and we know that $1 of care in the prevention early intervention stage can prevent $9 of acute care down the track. That's the kind of the international number we usually use. We've also committed to a $400 million upgrade of Flinders Medical Centre, 200 from the feds and 200 from state government matching, and that will look at a new ED, a new ICU, an eye clinic, an upgrade of the Margaret Tobin Centre, and a number of other things, some new beds there, and also at REPAP. We also have a youth mental health service, 20,000 uni places, which will be in areas of skills shortage, which includes nursing. But I'd also say that having nurses and aged care and more aged care workers in aged care will help people get their care in their aged care facility and not have to end up in the emergency department.
Here. Front row, or almost front row. I'm going to mix it up, gentlemen and ladies. This one here with in here. Here.
Hello. Power-hungry people try to control the narrative and the language and oppress and kill the vulnerable and the unwanted. People, including children, are enticed or coerced into doing things that will result in the susceptibility to think, feel, or act suicidally. Political correctness dehumanises people so that, on average, more than 1,500 people a week are murdered in this country for the crime of being unwanted.
Can you please ask the question, please, now?
Please outline a bill or more that you would be proposing or endorsing to protect the trapped, defenceless, voiceless humans in Australia. Please explain which humans will be protected and how the bill or bills will help them.
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, actually. When you say unwanted people being murdered, can you just clarify that for me, please, before I answer?
Well, the major people are preborn babies.
Oh, that's what I thought, okay.
All right.
Well, I'll just jump in, and I don't support the premise of your question. I didn't think I'd ever say that at all, but I'm very pro-choice. I don't believe that people, that you can describe abortions as murder. I think it's up to a woman to decide what happens to her body, and that's what we have here in Australia. And that's what we should continue to support.
I'm going to throw a spanner in the works there. I'd like to hear something from everybody else. When we're meant to be representatives, we've got to look at each particular case on a case-by-case basis. And for 20 years, every time I've run in elections, I get this question come through to me. And I know I'm not a woman, so I really don't understand it to some degree. But I've got to say, they say my body, my choice, but there's a stage, obviously there must be a stage where there's two lives involved. Two lives. And at that stage, whatever it may be, then it becomes, well, I'm not going to say that, but it becomes not about just oneself, it becomes about two people. And I'm not here to dictate to anyone what they should do with their bodies, but once there's two lives involved, and I'm not sure where that happens because I'm not an expert, but I know this, that each has to be on a case-by-case basis, and I've always said to people that if I had to look at legislation, I'd have to really reach deep down and talk to a lot of people to find out what that actually is. And I rely on speaking to the public and we're speaking to women to find out what the actual right response would be. But I don't think you can say open and cut, my body, my choice.
Well, I can. And do.
Okay.
Right. That's right, set up there. Anyone else who wants to take up?
Yes.
But you can.
Yes. Our position is we're against mid-term and full-term abortion. How could a mother spend 9 months sharing a breath, sharing a heartbeat, sharing her blood, sharing her nutrients?
It doesn't actually
and then,
happen.
excuse me, I'm talking, thank you. And then, at the point of meeting her father, that child is killed for the sake of medical waste. Now, medical waste fetches between $50,000 and $500,000 a year. And that's what pushes this mid-term and full-term abortion. So we're totally against it. Yes, you have to consider the mother's health as well in the early stages of pregnancy. Thank you.
I'm happy to go.
Again, there's no obligation to answer any questions. It's just a choice
look,
to you.
I would say that my doctorate was in embryology. I looked at preventing congenital birth defects in babies. I think life is precious and should be protected, but that always has to be a balance for the embryo and the mother. And I've sat in the room where people have had to make the worst decision of their life, and I would always make sure that if medically needed, an abortion is available for a woman and her partner. I would also make the point that that is only state government legislation, so none of these candidates as federal candidates can have an influence on that kind of legislation.
Yes, well, I'm also in agreement with you again, Rachel. I would say that these are personal, difficult decisions, and they are decisions that should be taken on a case-by-case basis by the woman and her treating medical team and partner, if there's a partner involved. I certainly don't think, as a politician, I would be arrogant enough to make rules for everyone without having that personal, individual knowledge about the woman's circumstance, her health, the health of the baby. This is not something we should be doing.
So, can I answer? Yeah, sorry. I was just waiting my turn. So, in the Greens, we support a woman's right to choose. I personally think for too long, women have been told by old white men what to do with their bodies, and it's not for them to decide. This is a health decision between a woman and her doctor, as Louise said. Thank you.
Hi, Carolyn Edwards is my name. I've lived up here since 1986. We came from overseas. Lovely place to live, so thanks, guys, for supporting us. Look, my big concern is I've got a young family. They're building at Mount Barker. They're in Rebecca Sharkey's electorate. And I go on the freeway frequently. And somebody approached me from an organisation. I was turning some papers out just the other day and I found this email. I thought, my God, I've forgotten all about this. This person informed me that bucket loads of federal money is being pumped into the Crossroads, and it's already evident. I pick up a young person every day from Urbray High School from year 7, and the schools, I've counted the 7 schools, either with playing fields, wetlands, access. They're loading the buses on Crossroads. Scares me to death. You come on the freeway at Mount Barker, you've got to be up to speed at least 80, 90 k's an hour to get on there. You get on there and you look in front of you and there's cars going everywhere because there's a whole line of B-doubles and everything else. They're doing about 40 k's an hour. And then there's, horrors at the bottom of the freeway and everything else.
Can you please ask the question?
Yes. Now the question is, what can we do to get the freight around the city to our northern, distributing hub, which is there anyway. Get this horror off the roads, please. It's just an absolute. It scares me to death.
Thank you.
And I have to go up there frequently. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm happy to jump in. So, look, having been in the CFS where I first respond to accidents on the freeway, I would like to see less trucks on the freeway. My brother is also a freight truck driver, and I know how difficult it is to navigate that stretch of road as a truck driver. It is dangerous. It wasn't designed for that. Look, we as a federal Liberal government are supporting a Greater Adelaide freight bypass, but this is actually a more complex problem around the workforce. The average age of the freight truck driver workforce is 55 years of age, which means we're actually getting to a shortage of people who can drive the freight that we need. What we actually need is a road network that sits outside of all metropolitan cities that takes even bigger trucks, because that allows less drivers to be able to move more freight. It's more cost effective, it's more environmentally friendly, and it stops the freight coming into our metropolitan areas. I think it's important to acknowledge though that as we buy more stuff online and we've got more grocery freight coming in, there will always be trucks that need to come down the freeway and will come along Cross. Cross isn't the highest one, it's actually Portrush that's the highest, and then Cross and then Glen Osmond is slightly less. And that's a reality of us purchasing more predominantly online, but I'm a huge advocate of us creating the bypass around for freight. Thank you.
I'll beat you to it. I'm not actually sure what the perfect solution is. I do know that what I've done in my area, I live in the north, is we've set up all sorts of things like produce markets where the farmers come and sell direct. We try and persuade people not to invest in products from overseas at all and to buy Australian, to help create jobs, and we help small businesses set up as well. So it might not be the answer to this question, but it might be an answer to start, as I said, looking at alternate ways of doing the things how they used to be done, because not necessarily everything that's gone forward for the last 20 years has been particularly the right direction.
Who's going to go next?
This is certainly something I hear about a lot, and prior to the state election there was actually an online Zoom forum where Tom Koutsantonis committed to looking at the freight bypass, not only trucks but also rail bypass. So at the moment, because the rail down through the hills goes through a tunnel, you can't double stack them. If you can go around, you can actually double stack the containers. So it becomes a lot more economical to actually have that rail network go around. The trucks themselves don't necessarily want to come into the city either. They have to slow down on the southeast freeway. There's traffic lights. They don't want to do it. It's not their best way. As you said, there is the northern distribution centres. There's the port, and then those going up through Port Augusta. So if they can go around, that's actually much better for them because they don't have to slow down. As Rachel said, obviously there are some trucks that will have to come into the city, delivering to our supermarkets, delivering to, if the end place that they're going is in the city, they'll have to come in. But if the end place is up north, then going round's much better for them too.
I'll just say very quickly that Adelaide is really the only capital city that still has freight at that level coming through as part of its commute, and so I certainly support that there would be a freight bypass road. And I think the one that Louise alluded to that the state government is getting behind is coming out through Murray Bridge. One thing I would say though is that because it will be still faster to come through Cross Road and through the residential areas, we need to do more than just build the road. We then need to mandate that the big trucks take the bypass and not take what will otherwise still be the shortcut through down Cross Road. So there needs to be both regulatory approach and an infrastructure approach.
Yes, the freeway always has been a problem with Devil's Elbow, if your memory serves you correctly. And as a result, the freeway was introduced, but that's increased the speed because of the steepness of the freeway. we'd be happy to support an alternative route for major trucks, but also the redirection of the freight trains so they can double stack and they don't increase the risk of derailment, but also the fires where the brake linings get red hot and they fly off into the scrub and cause fires. So yeah, there are a number of issues there that we can look at minimising the risks and also the congestion on our freeway. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to have 20 minutes on this question. Everyone who knows me knows how passionate I am about these issues. It's complete madness what we've done in Adelaide with putting freight through the middle of residential areas and through our city. Other sensible cities don't do this, so straight away we need to change what we're doing. The discussion about the bypass, I think the south bypass needs to be looked at again. The cost-benefit analysis that was done on it previously only looked at the cost and benefits for the freight industry. It didn't look at the benefits to the community of taking that freight out of the city, which it obviously needs to do. Getting that freight out of our residential areas would be a huge benefit. I think in general in this country we're just heading down the wrong path with massive investment in roads, trying to build bigger and bigger roads all the time, and we should be looking at rail and we should be looking at public transport. Now I know you're probably thinking, what's that got to do with trucks? Well, the overall traffic volume is affected by cars as well, so we need to reduce traffic volumes and stop this madness where we continue widening roads endlessly, which will fix nothing. We need to address demand for road transport. Thank you. Sorry, I thought I was going to get the cowbell then, but thanks.
We have time for one more question.
Wait some time. We'll put it up then afterwards.
First of all, thanks to all the candidates for having the guts to stand. Thank you. I know it's a huge personal toll, and congratulations and thank you for doing that. My name's Anne Muzzard and I'm in Boothby. Democracy and emergencies both rely on information which is reliable, universally available, researched and balanced. The information must not be dependent on advertising revenue or editorial bias. What's your commitment to restoring funding for the only media outlet committed to free and fair reporting in Australia, our ABC?
Perhaps I'll take first crack at that. Labor has committed to refunding ABC and SBS, and also to looking at putting their funding cycles onto a 5-year term, so that they're not at the whims of, or not having to beg every election cycle, and therefore so much more vulnerable to the whims of politicians.
I'll just jump in. I agree with Louise completely on this, completely supportive of the restoration of all of the funding to the ABC and to SBS. As a film and TV producer, I've worked with the ABC very closely. I know how important they are to the arts to ensure that our Australian stories are told. But they are also far more important than that, of course, in terms of the news of current affairs and the emergency services that they supply. They're the only source of independent news, and I think we need to look at that too. Australia has the most concentrated media market in the Western world, and there are real implications for that I think deserve a forensic and judicial investigation. What it means to have Murdoch everywhere, what it means to have Nine now bought out the Fairfax and control many of the major broadcasting outlets, what it means to have Channel 7 and the West Australian dominated by another white billionaire. There are lots of questions about our media that I think need some investigation, but first of all, let's restore that funding.
Yes, I think we definitely need an independent body to really monitor not just the ABC but all media. Now, we've experienced a tremendous amount of sanctions on people that have worthy news, that have alternative views, that are quite scientifically supported, and they've been blocked out deliberately by mainstream media. You've only got to stop using Yahoo and Google and have a look at some of these medical experts that have very different views on issues that have been censored by mainstream media. Thank you.
This is, you know, it's interesting. I've worked with the media for 20 years and I've never been a big fan at all. ABC I understand, SBS I understand. I think something needs to change, some accountability at least. And I worked on exposés and all sorts of things, and I must admit, you know, you see one side of the story, you see what's published, and generally it's pretty lacklustre, and at times it's outrightly corrupt. And I think we'd all like to see some sort of efforts put into ensuring that what we're watching on TV, there's some accountability to what's presented to us, so that we can actually make informed decisions. And that particularly applies right now to democracy, because you will see quite clearly on all mainstream media channels that there's a choice between two major parties, and while they run that type of agenda, people look at small parties, up-and-coming parties, and look at us like we have no hope, and they take away that hope. And democracy should be about the free will of an informed electorate, and so you should be informed about who is running, like you're doing right now, and then be able to make an informed vote. And I think that might change, just change how this country heads itself in the future.
You've been last so many times. You go, I'll go.
So in the Greens, we want to see funding for the ABC restored. We want that to be locked in over a long time frame, so it's not just decided on a short-term basis, which is quite disruptive to the ABC. And we'd like that to be determined independently, not at the whim of whatever government we happen to have. While we're at it, we want to see a royal commission into media ownership in this country. The majority of the media is owned by Rupert Murdoch, who obviously has a political persuasion that's quite obvious. Fairfax is chaired by Peter Costello, who obviously also has a similar political persuasion. This is damaging democracy in our country when the media is so heavily controlled by two people from one side of politics. We can see them ramping up their attacks on one side, and as we get closer to the election. So we want to see that looked into so that we can get more balance in Australia and not have media concentrated in the hands of one billionaire. Thank you.
Having lived overseas in a number of different countries, particularly where media is solely controlled by the government, I think we're very lucky to have the SBS and the ABC here in Australia. Are you okay? The ABC receives $1 billion of funding per year, and it received additional funding during COVID. I think it's critically important, particularly for our regional communities, where often that is the only service that they have access to. It's also critically important for conveying information in an emergency. I think the more we continue to support a diversification of media, the richer our country will be, and we should always challenge the information that we receive from any form of journalism.
I'm afraid I have to bring the Q&A to a close at this point, but remember that there's time to talk to the candidates individually at the conclusion of the formal forum. So now all candidates have 1 minute for a closing statement. I'll remind you of the order that was decided earlier by law. First up will be Joe, then Rachel, then Jeremy, then Louise, then Mark, and then Paul. So first up, Joe Dyer.
Thank you. Well, look, Saturday will soon be upon us, and it's been quite a journey to get to this point. The independents really are a new phenomenon in this election, and what we are offering you is to basically be beholden to none but you, the community that we serve. I come from the arts, so I work with people who are inspirational and who bring courage and imagination to the work that they do every day. That's the kind of paradigm shifting perspective I think we need in Canberra. We need imagination, we need courage, we need integrity, and these are not the things that we have been seeing in Canberra over the last 3 years. If you have ever thought a plague on both their houses, both of these major parties aren't talking to me and are as bad as each other, I'm here to tell you there's a viable option on Saturday, and consider putting a 1 next to my name. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for coming here this evening and participating in democracy. It's a wonderful privilege that we have here in Australia. I'm asking for your support because I know we need more scientists. We need people who've been brave enough to stare down some of the most challenging things on the planet and deliver real outcomes that have saved lives. If you vote for me, you'll get someone who's dedicated most of their life to serving their community around the world and right here in South Australia, and you'll get someone who delivers outcomes. If you vote for me, you'll get swift action for Boothby. Copyright Jeremy Carter.
Oh, that's me. Yeah. Sorry, I was too busy laughing.
Segue.
All right. So in the Greens, we don't take corporate donations, which means that we're here for you, the community. We will fight for a federal corruption commission, which is effective, and we will ask for a ban on corporate donations. We'll get dental and mental health into Medicare. We'll raise the pension and New Start to $88 a day to bring it above the poverty line. And we'll make education free, like it used to be for many of the politicians who are now in the parliament. We'll get billionaires and multinational corporations to pay their fair share of tax so we can balance the budget. We'll invest in education, health and public transport, things which help the community. We'll take action on climate change like we did when we were in balance of power with the Gillard government and achieved a price on carbon which gave us real emissions reductions. By voting Greens 1 and Labor 2nd, you can ensure that Barnaby Joyce, Peter Dutton and Scott Morrison are removed and send a strong message that we want a government that looks after people. Thank you.
Thank you. In 4 days, the country will decide our future. We can have 3 more years of the same, or we can vote for change. If you want action on climate change, if you want a federal ICAC, if you want better health care, if you want better aged care, then you need to vote for change. The Liberals have had 9 years. In Boothby, they've had 73 years. Boothby's now a marginal seat, so your vote counts. The only way to get change is to change the government. Labor is the only party that is able to form government in and of itself. If you want change, you need to vote Labor. That's really it. If you want more of the same, then you vote for how you want. If you want change, you need to vote for Labor. Thank you.
Real change. What about some real change? Something completely different, okay? No more of the same over and over and over of 40 or 50 years. Give yourself a chance. You put Peter Harrison here. He is an amazing man. I'm sorry he's not here to speak to you, but he is a local person. He's leading a political party which will only grow. Next time the election comes around, we'll run in every single seat. We're an emerging new major party. And you to have hit that leader here representing you is going to get you the best of everything. And I can tell you now, if you want real change, you don't get any change at all if you do the same thing you've done over and over and over and over and expect something different to come from it. What you do is you get change when you take a different step, a different direction. And not only is Peter able to act for you as an independent would, but he has a platform of brilliant people behind him and advisors behind him and healthcare professionals behind him so that he can go forth with the support of the party, but actually represent you, not the party. Thank you.
Yes, we're looking for change. The majors have dominated the political landscape for decades and decades and decades. It's our opportunity to remember and not forget the way these organisations or these corporations have performed over the decades. Now, the first thing we have to do is clean up Canberra, which involves both Labor and Liberal, before we can look at significant change. And that's our intention. If we get enough seats in Canberra, that is the first thing we want to do. Start from the top, clean up the rot, clean up the fraud, clean up the trafficking and everything else, so that we can start from scratch with a new government, a clean slate, and to be able to help the people genuinely from the heart, and not just throw money at the end of the day just for a vote. Thank you.
Well, that's pretty much it. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you for sticking to the rules. I have a feeling that some of you are a bit disappointed that I haven't used the cowbell.
Yes!
So, just for you.
I never got one.
I will now hand over to Jane to close the formal forum.
Well, thank you to all the candidates for coming tonight and being so dedicated in responding to all the questions our community have put to you. It's been very interesting, so thank you very much. And I'd also like to thank our moderator, Benito, for your time and effort tonight. Thank you very much. And just to remind people that you can get a tea and coffee and a biscuit at the back of the hall here, and take the time now to speak to our candidates. And the candidates' materials are on the table in the foyer. And thank you also again to the Uniting Church and our Reverend, for providing the venue. Thank you very much, everyone.